Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. A susurrus through the iron arteries of the building. That's how it began. Not the familiar gurgle of water's passage, nor the groans of an edifice settling into its centenarian bones. The Viridian Arms, vintage 1922, possessed a whole symphony of such mundane creaks and sighs. No, this was different. These were words, faint dialogues bleeding through the plaster and lath of apartment 4B's bathroom wall. My task was simple: staunch a leak, a routine affliction for plumbing that had weathered nearly a century. 8 years I'd tended the Viridian's mechanical ailments. I knew its warped floorboards, its corroded fixtures. Never had I encountered whispers within its walls. The tenant, Mrs. Albright, had entrusted me with her key, off for the day, leaving instructions to secure the place upon completion. Compelled, I pressed my ear to the cool tile, tracing the phantom conversation. A man, a woman. Their speech, though indistinct, carried an unmistakable cadence. A tentative rap of my knuckles against the wall. Silence descended instantly. Absolute. "Anyone there?" My voice sounded thin in the small room. Only the drip from the faucet answered. My phone yielded the building's schematics. Lines on a screen depicted solid partition between 4B and its neighbor, 4A. But blueprints, especially for structures of this vintage, were often mere suggestions, palimpsests overwritten by undocumented renovations. I'd unearthed forgotten doorways, bricked up windows, entire chambers swallowed by plaster during decades past. Retrieving my heavier tools, I commenced the careful extraction of bathroom tiles. The grout, already powdering with age, offered little resistance. Inspecting for moisture damage seemed prudent anyway. 4 tiles down, my hammer blow met not plaster, but void. A hollow echo. Gently, I widened the breach, peeling back more ceramic squares. Beyond lay a narrow cavity, perhaps 2 feet across. My flashlight beam sliced through air thick with cobwebs and the dust of generations, illuminating vague shapes huddled in the tenebrous gap. I enlarged the opening until I could just shoulder my way inside. The space constricted around me, air stale, cloying with particulate history. Turning required careful maneuvering. Light snagged on metal glinting from the floor debris. An old tin, shoebox-sized. Beside it, a leather satchel, its surface cracked, ossified by time. The murmuring had ceased entirely, leaving only the rasp of my own breath and the crunch of plaster dust beneath my boots. I lifted the tin first. Its weight surprised me. Rusted hinges fought my screwdriver before yielding. Within lay strata of paper currency, antiquated bills bearing oversized portraits bound by rubber bands that disintegrated at my touch. Thousands, easily. The satchel disgorged jewelry, tarnished gold chains, rings set with dulled stones, wristwatches frozen at some forgotten hour, undeniably valuable despite their neglect. Beneath it all, a small notebook, its pages brittle, yellowed like old teeth. My light fell upon the first page, ink faded but legible. June 15th, 1947. Made the transfer near midnight. V insists we lie low. Too much attention after the Beaumont job. Haul was substantial, our best yet. 3 ways nets $12,000 apiece, decent for a night's enterprise. Authorities remain clueless. Press calls it a burglary spree, ignorant of the scope. Adhere to the plan, keep silent, and we're untouchable. A tremor started in my hands as I navigated the fragile pages. The notebook chronicled nearly 2 years of larceny. Jewelers, affluent residences, even a bank. Names, dates, spoils meticulously recorded. The final inscription, dated April 1949, something's amiss. V hasn't made contact in 3 days. R saw police surveilling his residence. Suspect betrayal. Must relocate the cash immediately. Will retrieve it when the climate improves. They never returned. The horde had marinated in darkness for 75 years. Footfalls sounded in the apartment beyond the bathroom. Mrs. Albright back prematurely. Hastily, I returned the box and bag to their crypt, replacing the tiles clumsily. A proper repair would require more time, more finesse. "Mr. Silas, are you still about?" Mrs. Albright's voice echoed from the living area. "Just concluding," I called back, my voice catching. Had to open a section of wall, check the pipes within. Some moisture damage evident. I'll need to return tomorrow for a proper patch. Oh dear, anything serious? Nothing alarming. Just aged plumbing behaving as expected. I gathered my implements, forcing steadiness into my hands. First thing tomorrow, I'll bring the necessary materials. The drive home was a fugue state, thoughts colliding. 50,000, maybe more, secreted away in that wall. Technically, stolen property. Belonging to the building owner, the police? But after 3/4 of a century, who would pursue it? The statute of limitations surely offered sanctuary. Sleep eluded me, chased by the memory of those disembodied voices. Auditory illusion? Old buildings played tricks, yet they were undeniably words, conversations. Sound bleeding from elsewhere? The blueprints insisted otherwise. Solid wall. Dawn found me back at the Viridian by 7. Mrs. Albright, clad in her bathrobe, admitted me. "Goodness, you certainly meant early," she remarked. Best to address these matters promptly. Water damage compounds if neglected. I waited until her departure for her morning constitutional, then made straight for the bathroom. The replaced tiles stood out, jarringly new. I'd need to artificially age them. But first, another look into that interstitial void. The voices resumed the moment I disturbed the tiles. Sharper now, chillingly distinct. They'll find us. They always discover us. Quiet. No one searches anymore. Too much time has passed. I froze, tools fallen from numb fingers. The sound emanated from within. The hidden space. Impossible. I'd been inside yesterday. It barely accommodated one person. More tiles came away. I directed my flashlight into the aperture. Box and bag rested undisturbed. But now, footprints marred the thick dust. Fresh tracks, leading deeper into the wall. Incomprehensible. The space was a mere couple of feet wide, perhaps 6 feet long. I'd surveyed its entirety, nowhere for footprints to lead. Yet there they were, and they were not mine. Logic screamed, seal the wall, depart, notify the owner, the authorities, do anything but what I did next. I squeezed back through the opening. The footprints terminated at what appeared to be the solid rear boundary of the cavity, but under pressure from my hand, it yielded. A concealed door, masterfully disguised. The voices intensified. "Someone is here! Quick, conceal it!" I shoved the door. It groaned open on protestant, rust-caked hinges, revealing absolute blackness beyond. My flashlight beam carved through the dark, illuminating a chamber roughly 12 feet square. Bare brick walls, concrete floor, not empty. 2 figures occupied a far corner. A man and a woman draped in the fashions of the 1940s, coated in a fine patina of dust. Their faces were sunken, grayish canvases, eyes like burnt holes in fabric. They regarded me, unblinking. I staggered back, skull connecting sharply with the low ceiling. The beam of my flashlight passed through them, undeterred, unwavering, because they weren't truly there. Couldn't be. "You were not meant to find this sanctuary," the woman stated, her voice the rustle of desiccated leaves. "No one was," the man echoed. "We ensured its secrecy." I'm just fixing the pipes," I stammered, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs, drowning my own words. "Deceiver!" the woman hissed. "You returned for the spoils. They invariably return for the spoils." "How many?" The question escaped before I could contain it, though dread coiled around the answer I didn't want. How many others discovered this? The man offered a smile, revealing teeth too uniform, too sharp. Sufficient. The avaricious always navigate their way here. Their return journey, however, is less certain. I fled, dropped the flashlight, careened off the narrow passage walls, scraped flesh raw against coarse brick. Behind me, their laughter pursued, no longer muffled, but crystalline, cold, echoing in the confined space. I erupted from the wall opening into Mrs. Albright's brightly lit bathroom, shedding dust and ancient cobwebs like a second skin. Didn't cease running until I was behind the wheel of my truck, engine sputtering to life, hands trembling too violently to engage the gears. From the parking lot, I phoned the building owner, reported significant water damage requiring immediate attention, potential structural compromise, the necessity of opening the entire wall. "Obtain estimates from contractors," he instructed casually. "We'll address it next month, budget permitting." I resigned that afternoon, found employment across town, tending to newer constructions with reliable blueprints and walls that remained steadfastly inanimate, structures where pipes conveyed only water and steam. Yet sometimes, in the profound quiet of night, the voices return, not through plaster or iron, but within the chambers of my own mind. I ponder the others who located that room, the greedy ones, the ones who didn't run. Dreams resurrect the notebook. I wonder if entries exist beyond April 1949. Subsequent editions. Names and dates cataloging every soul lured by the hidden space and its tarnished treasures. Everyone consumed by avarice. Everyone who failed to escape. The Viridian Arms endures, its antiquated plumbing persisting, failing, demanding repair. Occasionally, I drive past, gaze drawn to the windows of 4B. Sometimes I perceive indistinct shapes moving behind the glass. Sometimes they seem to wave. I never reciprocate. I've contemplated disclosure. The police, the owner, the historical society. But credibility is fragile. And what fate awaits the unfortunate soul dispatched to corroborate my tale? Better, perhaps, to let the secret remain interred. Let the voices stay whispers. Let the dust guard its chronicle. But, should you ever find yourself laboring within the bowels of an old edifice and hear murmurs where none should be, heed my counsel. Mend what is broken, patch what requires patching, and resolutely ignore the rest. Some voids are meant to remain inviolate. Some treasures are destined for oblivion, and if you do stumble upon something, currency, jewels, cryptic journals, replace it precisely. Seal the breach, depart. The voices may beckon, may unveil illusions, may proffer riches. Do not listen, do not look, do not partake. Because the nature of hidden spaces is this: they are concealed for profound reasons, and sometimes those reasons linger, still observing, still awaiting the arrival of the acquisitive. I was fortunate. I ran. But those voices, those spectral custodians in the gloom, they possess infinite patience. They have nothing but time, and inevitably, someone else will discern their call through the walls. Someone else's curiosity will ignite. Someone else's greed will stir, and perhaps that someone's flight will not be swift enough. Under the pitiless fluorescence of the service station washroom, the porcelain and chrome gleamed with the sterile hostility. Cold water, sharp against my skin, did little to erode the crust of fatigue accumulated over 12 relentless hours of driving. My reflection swam into focus in the mirror above the basin, eyes shadowed, bearing the imprint of too many white lines devoured in darkness, too few hours surrendered to sleep. Those same weary eyes were poised, though I couldn't know it then, on the precipice of a sight that would etch itself into the marrow of my memory. My name is Leo. The plan was elemental. A cross-country migration with Clara, my love, chasing the promise of a shared horizon in California. Days bled together, a smear of asphalt ribbons and the synthetic taste of roadside sustenance. The highway hummed its endless, hypnotic drone. Midnight had just surrendered its claim when we drifted into the rest area's desolate embrace. The lot lay mostly vacant, a scattering of slumbering Leviathan trucks and one scuffed anonymous motorhome its only occupants. Clara had succumbed to sleep 100 miles back, her profile soft against the passenger side glass. "Hey," I murmured, a gentle nudge to her shoulder. "Pit stop. Need anything?" She surfaced slowly, blinking against the car's sudden interior brightness like a nocturnal creature startled by dawn. Water, maybe? Something small? A nod. My wallet emerged from the console's clutter. Back in a flash, hit the locks, yeah? Her assent was a drowsy sigh, already receding into slumber's tide. I lingered a moment, a faint smile tracing my lips. Even travel-worn and creased, she held an effortless beauty. Stepping out, the night air met me. Cool, clean, a welcome balm after the car's close atmosphere. My spine cracked in a satisfying cascade as I stretched. Ahead, the rest stop building pulsed, an island of artificial light adrift in the immense ink-black desert. As I neared the entrance, a figure detached itself from the shadows by the wall. He drew on a cigarette, the ember flaring like a miniature, malevolent star. An unbidden prickle of unease traced my nerves. Perhaps it was the way his gaze snagged on mine as I passed, or the smile that stretched just a fraction too wide across his face. "Night," he rasped, the sound like stones grinding together. I offered a curt nod, lengthening my stride. In and out. Quick. The interior echoed my footsteps on the polished floor, amplifying the emptiness. Vending machines hummed their low, mechanical chant. I procured waters, pretzels, the requested provisions, then turned towards the washroom. Which brought me to the present moment, staring down my own reflection, wrestling an amorphous dread I couldn't name. Hands dried, supplies gathered, I pushed outwards, back towards Clara, back towards the road, and nearly walked straight into him, the man from outside. He staggered slightly, offering a cascade of apologies. "'S all right," I mumbled, attempting to navigate around his sudden presence. He remained planted. That disquieting smile bloomed again. "Long haul?" he inquired. A reluctant nod. Politeness warred with the urge to flee. "Yeah, California bound." "California," he echoed, rolling the word on his tongue like a foreign delicacy. "Long way. Traveling solo?" Ice water trickled down my spine. Clara, alone in the locked car. "No," I stated, injecting firmness into my voice. "Girlfriend's waiting. We should really push on." He raised his hands, placating, the smile unwavering. Sure. Safe travels." I pushed past, resisting the instinct to glance back. The cool air struck me again as I exited, a bracing slap. Deep breath. Calm the frantic drummer in my chest. Our car sat patiently, a familiar silhouette in the alien landscape of the lot. Through the window, I could see Clara's outline, head still canted against the glass. A light tap on the window, not wanting to jolt her. Nothing. Deeper sleep then. I tried the handle. Locked, as requested. Good girl. "Clara?" Louder this time, rapping knuckles against the glass. "Back now. Can you unlock?" Stillness reigned within the vehicle. Concern began to sprout, tendrils pushing through the earlier unease. I knocked harder, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet night. "Clara, wake up." Silence. My pulse escalated to a frantic tempo. Pressing my face close to the window, hands cupped to shield the glare, I peered inside. The seats were vacant, empty. I stumbled back, reality tilting. Impossible. Minutes. I was gone only minutes. Where? I spun, sprinting back towards the building, bursting through the doors. The man vanished. "Hello?" My voice caromed off the tiled surfaces, thin and desperate. "Anyone, help!" Only silence answered. I charged towards the women's restroom, disregarding the sign, shoving the door inward. "Clara?" The name cracked. "You in here?" Empty stalls stood sentinel, mocking my search. Outside again, I circled the car, eyes scanning, hunting for any sign, any direction she might have taken. Then I saw it. A tiny snag of yarn caught fast on the door handle's edge. Recognition hit like a physical blow. The soft blue wool of the sweater Clara had been wearing. The blood in my veins turned to slush. This wasn't a game, not a misunderstanding. Something had seized Clara. My phone felt alien in my trembling hand. Fingers fumbled, finally punching the 3 digits. 911, what is your emergency? "My girlfriend," I choked out, fighting for control. "Missing, rest stop. Highway 40, maybe 50 miles east of Flagstaff. I went inside, just minutes, came back. She's gone." The dispatcher's voice, professionally level, was a jarring counterpoint to my internal chaos. "Sir, take a deep breath for me. Describe your girlfriend." I recited the details. 5'6", cascade of brown hair, eyes the color of moss, jeans, the blue sweater. My own eyes frantically sweeping the lot, praying for her image to materialize from the shadows. "Officers are en route, sir," the voice assured. "ETA 20 minutes. Please don't touch anything around the vehicle. It might be evidence." Evidence. The word landed like a fist in my gut. This was happening. Pacing the asphalt, my mind churned through scenarios, each iteration darker than the last. Could she have left? Willingly? No. Unthinkable. We were poised on the edge of everything new, and her purse, her phone, both still nestled innocently inside the car, which meant the thought remained unfinished, too monstrous to articulate. Time stretched, taffy-like, each second an agony. A part of me still expected the harsh jolt back to reality, to find this was merely a nightmare spawned by exhaustion and questionable coffee. But the distant rising keen of sirens sliced through the delusion. 2 cruisers swept into the lot, their rotating lights bathing the scene in frantic strobes of crimson and sapphire. As the officers approached, a constriction seized my chest. Voicing it would make it irrevocably real. "You the caller? Missing person?" one officer asked, his expression carefully neutral. A tight nod, swallowing against the lump in my throat. My girlfriend, Clara, in the car. I went inside, came back, gone. He made notes in a small pad. Sure, she didn't just step out, stretch her legs. She'd have said, I insisted, desperation sharpening my tone. Her stuff's still here. Something's wrong. I feel it. They began their work. Methodical sweeps of the area, brief interviews with the few truckers stirring in their cabs. The strange man I'd encountered, melted into the night. Hours dissolved into a haze of repeated questions, frantic calls, and a dread that coiled tighter with each passing moment. As the first tentative strokes of dawn painted the eastern sky, the brutal truth began to solidify. Clara was gone, swallowed by the night, leaving barely a ripple. This rest stop, moments before just another forgettable pause on a long journey, had become the axis of my terror. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every remaining stranger a potential phantom. Watching the sun climb, casting long, accusatory shadows across the now empty asphalt, a chilling certainty settled over me. Our road trip, intended as the prologue to our shared future, had violently detoured. It marked the beginning of a different pilgrimage entirely, one whose destination I feared I might never reach. The harsh, artificial lights yielded to the pale wash of morning, but the darkness of those few minutes promised to linger indefinitely. My world, meticulously constructed, had been shattered in the time it took to buy water and pretzels. The open road, once a symbol of boundless freedom, now stretched before me, an infinite, agonizing question. Where was Clara? What transpired in that sliver of time I was away? And the most terrifying question, the one that echoed loudest in the sudden silence: would I ever see her again? As the formal investigation commenced, one truth burned clear. I would not stop. I would unravel this, follow the thread back, no matter how deep into darkness it led. Our journey had taken a savage twist, and I was now navigating the most critical passage of my life. The search for Clara, and for the truth hidden within the heart of that desolate night. The venerable oak groaned its protest as Alara eased it inward, the sound swallowed by the echoing nave of the deserted library. Silence reigned supreme, absolute save for the hinge's drawn-out complaint. Midnight had bled well into the subsequent hour. Though the lamp at the circulation desk cast a lonely pool of light, the chair behind it sat vacant. Permission granted, stay till dawn, disturb nothing. The night watchman's words echoed hollowly, a promise given lightly. One manuscript, its call number a cryptic sequence scribbled on a fragment nestled in her coat pocket, was all she sought. She navigated the first corridor, her footfalls muffled yet distinct against the ancient floorboards that sighed under her weight. The air hung thick, a compound essence of brittle paper, dust motes dancing in the gloom, and the sharp tang of aged varnish. Towering shelves of somber wood loomed on either side, their contents pressed tight. Overhead, antiquated fixtures dispensed a weak, jaundiced illumination, some bulbs sputtering with a fitful pulse. No music, no thrum of climate control, only the measured, almost imperceptible beat of a distant clock ticking away unseen moments. Her gaze scanned the labels affixed beside each towering section until the sequence matched her note. A finger, hesitant, traced the spines of leather-bound volumes, many stripped of their jackets, their surfaces cracked like drought-stricken earth, titles lost to time and wear. Then she found it. The sought-after text, swaddled in a drab cloth sheath, feeling desiccated and faintly abrasive to the touch. Clutching her prize, she carried it to a nearby reading table, shadowed beneath its own meager lamp. The table listed, unsteady on the uneven floor, rocking slightly as she deposited the manuscript. She drew out a chair, its heavy frame scraping a harsh chord against the wood. Opening the volume released a puff of stale air. The pages, yellowed and stiffened by decades, resisted turning. Alara squinted, attempting to decipher the script, an unfamiliar hand, elegant yet utterly illegible. She tilted her head, studying the alien contours of the letters. As another brittle page yielded, a sound surfaced. A muffled chuckle, brief and low. Her head snapped up. Nothing but shadowed aisles and the silent sentinels of books. A pause, a held breath, then her gaze returned to the text. She turned another leaf. Again, the quiet laugh, closer this time, seeming to vibrate from within the manuscript itself, not the surrounding space. Leaning nearer, straining her ears, she heard only the relentless clock and the low electrical hum. A tremor of unease prompted her to turn, to survey the aisles behind. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the dimness, appearing multiplied, longer than her initial impression. Had there been only 5, perhaps 6 aisles? Now 8, maybe 10, receded into shadow. Taking a step back from the table, her eyes traced the parquet pattern underfoot. Something felt dissonant. Glancing toward the remembered direction of the entrance, she saw only an unbroken wall of books where open space should have been. A few paces confirmed it. The corridor between the stacks had subtly realigned. The path she'd taken from the door was no longer straight. A slight bend had appeared, displacing the table's position relative to her entry point. She rubbed her eyes, blaming fatigue. Returning to the manuscript, she drew the lamp closer, its bulb humming a soft counterpoint to the clock. Another page turned. A distinct, dry giggle rustled from between the leaves. Goose flesh prickled her arms, her throat constricted. Gently, deliberately, she closed the volume and rose. A breath of air, a moment outside this oppressive silence, seemed vital. She searched for the entrance. Mere moments ago, it had been behind her, perhaps 20 paces distant. Now, only shelves met her gaze. Circling the table, stepping left, she peered down an aisle that plunged into an unnatural darkness, extending far beyond the building's plausible dimensions. Another aisle yielded only more shelves. Turning in a slow, disoriented circle, she found no trace of the front desk, no hint of the massive oak door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A film of perspiration cooled her brow. Swallowing hard, she called out, "Hello?" Her voice, thin and reedy, bounced back unanswered. Clearing her throat, she tried again, louder. "Is anyone here?" Silence swallowed the words whole. She listened intently. A faint scraping, like something sharp dragged across wood, reached her ears. It ceased the instant her attention fixed upon it. Tentatively, she moved toward the source. The overhead lights flickered violently. The scent of varnish intensified. No other light source penetrated the gloom. No windows, no emergency exit signs, just the antique lamps and the seemingly infinite ranks of shelves. She tried to reconstruct her path. Straight from the entrance, locate the manuscript, sit at the table. Now, the familiar landmarks had vanished, dissolved into this bewildering maze. Down one aisle she trod, the shelves towering 8 feet high, crammed with somber, unadorned bindings. Each bay looked identical, the dark wood absorbing the feeble light. Reaching the aisle's end, she turned right into another corridor, hurrying now, desperate for a boundary, a wall, an exit. Instead, the path curved, depositing her back near the table where the cloth-bound manuscript lay waiting. A chilling realization dawned. She was trapped in a loop. Retrieving the manuscript, tucking it under her arm, she thought perhaps returning it might undo the distortion. She remembered the shelf, the label. She retraced her steps, but where the designated spot should have been stood a different shelf, holding unfamiliar volumes. She checked adjacent aisles, then others, frantically searching. The original location was gone. The manuscript, held tight, seemed to acquire a phantom weight, heavier than moments before, though the laughter within it had fallen silent. Again, the lights pulsed erratically. A low vibration shivered through the floorboards, the groan of immense weight shifting. Glancing over her shoulder, Alara saw it. A towering bookshelf gliding slowly, its base scarring the wooden floor. The shelves were moving, rearranging the library's very architecture. She fought down rising panic, her breath coming in shallow gasps, mouth dry as parchment. There was no logical explanation, yet the impossible unfolded before her eyes. The aisles were reforming, contracting, expanding. She resolved to find a perimeter wall. Surely the library had boundaries. She pushed forward down a corridor, forcing herself to walk straight, resisting the urge to turn. Time stretched, measured only by the monotonous rhythm of her steps. Still, shelves hemmed her in on all sides. Stopping, she rested a hand against a stack of books. Their covers felt unnaturally cold. Pressing onward, after several more disoriented minutes, she reached a corner. A door, inset with a small glass panel, offered a flicker of hope. She seized the handle. Locked solid, she pushed, pulled, rattled it futilely. Knocking produced only a dull thud, absorbed by the wood. The scraping sound returned, closer now, chillingly intimate. Pressing her ear to the door yielded nothing but silence from the other side. Another wrench on the handle proved useless. Turning back, she faced a long, shadowed aisle. The lamps buzzed insistently. The cloying sweetness of polish hung in the air. Fatigue made her legs heavy as she walked. A glimpse of her reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher cabinet showed a pale, sweat-slicked face. Her fingers brushed a pocket holding the slip of paper, the now useless call number. It didn't matter. As she moved, the floor seemed to cant slightly beneath her feet. Then, a whisper, faint as a rustling silk, breathed her name. Alara. She froze. She hadn't given her name. No one had asked. No register signed. How? She scanned the oppressive rows of books. No one. Just shelves in the sickly yellow light. The voice, low and raspy, repeated her name, then ceased. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. Only silence answered. Hesitantly, she moved toward the sound's perceived origin. Another table materialized from the gloom, identical to the first but displaced. The manuscript was gone from under her arm. A jolt of confusion. She hadn't put it down. Then she saw it, lying open upon the table before her. She knew she'd been carrying it. Somehow it had returned here. Approaching cautiously, she peered at the open page. Faded ink, tight, slanted script, still indecipherable. Her finger traced a line. The paper felt strangely warm beneath her touch. Lifting her hand, she rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, finding a faint, dusty residue. And then the laughter again. A brief, stifled giggle. With a sharp intake of breath, she slammed the book shut, pushing it away. The scrape and noise erupted, louder, closer. Behind her, a bookshelf slid ponderously across the aisle, its wooden foot gouging deep marks into the floor, blocking her retreat. She darted forward only to see another shelf begin its inexorable glide, sealing the path ahead. Trapped. A narrow gap to her left offered a sliver of escape. She squeezed through just as another massive unit threatened to close the space. She found herself in a small reading alcove. A single armchair, a low table, a lamp perpetually lit, its switch jammed. Reaching out, she brushed the bulb, searingly hot. She snatched her hand back, rubbing it against her trousers, forcing slow, deliberate breaths. Alara. The name whispered again from just beyond the shelves to her left. Rising, holding her breath, she edged toward the sound. Between the stacks, a shape resolved itself, tall, slender, indistinct in the weak light. Before she could speak, it retreated soundlessly into the deeper shadows. Hurrying to the spot, she found no passage, no door, only the unyielding spines of more books. "I just want to leave," she pleaded aloud, her voice betraying her fear. "I'm sorry if I disturbed anything. I won't take the manuscript." No reply came, only the unnerving sound of nails or something like them scratching against the floorboards, terribly close now. A tremor ran through her. Searching desperately, her hand closed around the solid weight of a heavy hard cover. She gripped it tightly, her palm slick with sweat. Inch by cautious inch, she moved, staying low, peering around the corners of shelves. Every attempt to move toward where the exit ought to be was met by the groaning, scraping ballet of the shifting bookshelves. The lights flickered, casting monstrous, dancing shadows. Her sense of direction utterly failed her. She tried focusing on details, a small brass plaque on one shelf end, vaguely familiar. She reversed her direction. After minutes of painstaking navigation through the rearranging labyrinth, she reached a corner that felt different. A glass door bearing an obscured sign. The handle felt loose. She pulled. It swung inward, revealing a small, quiet office. Stepping inside felt like entering a pocket of stillness. A simple wooden desk, a green-shaded reading lamp, a filing cabinet. The drawers were empty, save for scattered paper clips and a desiccated pen. Lifting the telephone receiver yielded only dead silence. She went to the window behind the desk. Painted shut. Pressing her forehead against the cool glass, she peered out into absolute darkness. No moon, no city glow, only the vague dark masses of what might have been trees. The window frame was thick, unyielding. Leaving the sanctuary of the office, she found herself deposited into yet another unfamiliar corridor. Here, the shelves stood in disciplined, straight lines, stretching toward a discernible endpoint in the distance. Hope surged. She walked toward it, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loudly. The corridor opened into a space that resonated with faint familiarity. Far ahead, the solitary glow of the front desk lamp. She quickened her pace, shoes squeaking on the polished wood. The desk loomed closer, the massive entrance door visible just beyond it. She broke into a run, eyes fixed on the exit, not daring to look back. The scraping sounds had ceased. The laughter was gone. The whispering voice fell silent. The entrance door stood closed, but a thin blade of light shone beneath it. Reaching it, she grasped the handle, turned. It wouldn't budge, locked. She threw her shoulder against the heavy wood. The frame shuddered but held fast. Stepping back, heart sinking, she scanned the now still library. The silence pressed in, thick and watchful. Suddenly, the voice whispered again, directly behind her. "Elara." She spun around. Between the shelves, perhaps 10 feet away, stood the blurred shape, head tilted as if in contemplation. She took an involuntary step toward it. The figure dissolved back into the shadows. "What you want?" she yelled, the sound raw in her throat. No answer. Rubbing her face, gritting her teeth against a rising tide of despair, she turned back to the door. She twisted the handle violently, yanking, lifting, shoving. Useless. Spying a heavy dictionary on a nearby shelf, she seized it and brought it down hard against the metal handle. A clang echoed. The door seemed to shift fractionally. Trying the handle again, she felt a slight give. Pulling with all her strength, it opened an inch, then 2. Wedging her foot in the gap, she strained, prying it open until she could squeeze through, forcing it wider with her shoulder. She stumbled out into the main building hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead were steady, casting a clean, even glow on the tiled floor. The air smelled faintly of old disinfectant, blessedly normal. Looking back, she saw the library door swing shut. She tried the handle from this side, locked tight. Through the small glass panel, the interior looked utterly ordinary. Shelves in neat rows, the front desk, the reading tables. Nothing moved. The lights burned steadily. No laughter, no whispers, no shift in architecture. She walked quickly down the hallway toward the building's main entrance. The large glass doors at the front were unlocked. Pushing one open, she stepped out into the cool, damp night air. The sky remained dark, starless. A lone car passed on the distant street. She stood there for a long moment, drawing deep, ragged breaths, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind an aching soreness in her muscles. Her shirt clung damply to her back. Her name, whispered by the unseen presence, echoed in her mind. The how and why of the library's sentience, its malevolent playfulness, remained terrifyingly opaque. Right now, escape was enough. Taking hesitant steps away from the imposing facade, she glanced back one last time. The old library stood silent and dark, its windows vacant eyes, the heavy oak door firmly shut. It appeared mundane, harmless. Nothing stirred within. She saw no shadows move, heard nothing escape its confines. Turning resolutely away, she walked, placing one foot deliberately in front of the other, until she reached the main gate and passed out into the empty street, never once looking back. The city's incessant clamor had worn grooves into my nerves. Escape felt less like a desire, more like a biological imperative. A secluded cabin promised by grainy online photographs beckoned, a haven nestled deep within arboreal silence, miles from any paved artery. Simple, solitary, surrounded by an ocean of trees. Precisely the balm I sought. The journey itself was a shedding. Asphalt giving way to a rutted dirt track that coiled deeper into the forest's embrace. Excitement, sharp and clean, pricked at me, the thrill of deliberate solitude. Dusk was painting the sky in bruised purples and fading golds as the cabin materialized in its clearing. A humble timber structure, porch facing westward, it mirrored the advertised serenity. A stone fire pit sat waiting. Cordwood stood stacked sentinel by the door. Beyond, the woods pressed close, a dense, watchful tapestry. Parking the sedan, I retrieved my luggage, the silence amplifying the crunch of my boots on the earth. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of disuse. Not decay, but the dormant musk of wood smoke and settled dust. Cranking open the protestant windows invited the cool vespertine breeze, a welcome guest. Unpacking was perfunctory. The absence of signal bars, the void where Wi-Fi should be, was a feature, not a flaw, a deliberate severing. With belongings stowed, I ventured back into the twilight to coax flames from the waiting pit. The sky deepened, elongated shadows bled from the tree line, swallowing the clearing inch by inch. Enthroned by the nascent fire, I absorbed the quietude, punctuated only by the wood's eager crackle and the whisper of evening air against my skin. It was a profound stillness, a luxury. Yet, insidiously, another sensation crept in, the prickle of unseen eyes, a baseless conviction, perhaps born of urban paranoia transplanted to the wild but persistent. My gaze kept snagging on the dense wall of trees, searching the layered darkness for a shape, a presence that logic insisted wasn't there. I chided myself. Solitude was the goal, wasn't it? Still, the feeling lingered, a faint, dissonant hum beneath the forest's calm. Embers glowed like dying stars as I retreated indoors, the heavy bolt sliding home with unnerving finality. Windows secured, I surrendered to the bunk, the day's weight pressing down. The silence here wasn't empty. It was immense, textured, amplifying the faint nocturnal stirrings beyond the walls, a leaf skittering, a twig snapping. Sleep eventually claimed me, only to release me into the pale, aqueous light of dawn filtering through the panes. I rose, stretched the kinks from my spine, and stepped out for a brief reconnaissance before coffee. Dew clung to the grass, mist wreathed the trees, lending the morning an ethereal stillness. Peace began to reassert itself, fragile but welcome. Then I saw it. A folded scrap of paper rested innocuously on the porch floorboards. A jolt, cold and sharp, went through me as I stooped to retrieve it. Crude, hurried script sprawled across the cheap paper. I saw you by the fire. A glacial tremor traced my spine. My head snapped up, eyes raking the impassive tree line. Nothing, just the vast, silent woods. A prank? Mischievous hikers? The rationalizations felt flimsy, hollow. This place was profoundly remote. Retreating inside, the heavy door thudding shut, I stared at the intrusive message, the words burning themselves onto my retinas. Someone had been near, close. A tide of apprehension washed over me, yet I clung to the possibility of innocent mischief. Placing the note on the rough-hewn counter, I forced myself through the motions of breakfast, attempting to recapture the intended rhythm of repose. It was futile. The day unfolded under a pall of anxiety. Every glance through the window was freighted with expectation, a half-formed image of a watcher lurking just beyond view. But the forest offered only its stoic indifference. The silence, once coveted, now felt charged, heavy, pressing in from all sides. Relaxation remained stubbornly out of reach. Evening drew in, and compelled by a desperate need for normalcy, I built another fire, feeding it logs as if warding off more than just the chill. I stared into the hypnotic dance of flames, arguing with my own escalating fear. But the sensation of being observed returned, amplified, clinging like damp cloth. My head swiveled constantly, scanning the deepening gloom, heart leaping at phantom movements in the periphery. The strain became unbearable. Dousing the flames felt like surrender, but staying felt like madness. Inside, the ritual of securing the door, checking the window latches, offered little comfort. Sleep was a distant shore. I lay rigid in the darkness, hyper-attuned to the cabin's groans and the forest's whispers. Every rustle, every creak sent adrenaline searing through me. Sometime in the deepest hours, a profound sense of wrongness jolted me awake, heart hammering against my ribs. What sound, what premonition had pierced my fragile sleep? I moved like a wraith through the small space, verifying locks, peering through glass into impenetrable blackness. Nothing visible, yet the certainty of an external presence was absolute. Returning to bed was pointless. I lay wide-eyed, listening to the crushing weight of the silence until dawn, and there it was again. Same spot on the porch. Another folded paper. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, dread coiling in my gut. I watched you check the locks. Nausea surged, close enough to see inside, to observe my fearful circuit, watching while I thought I was safe, while I slept. The door slammed shut behind me, the bolt rammed home. My breath came in ragged bursts, trapped, miles from aid, electronically invisible. Whoever lingered out there knew my isolation was complete. That day passed in a blur of terrified inertia. I remained within the cabin's flimsy sanctuary, unable to eat, nerves frayed to the point of snapping. Each sound from outside, a branch scraping the roof, the wind sighing through the pines, caused me to freeze, muscles locked, listening with an intensity that bordered on pain. The silence between sounds was worse, thick with anticipation. Night fell like a shroud. No fire tonight. Every lamp blazed, pushing futilely against the encroaching darkness. I huddled against a wall, a useless kitchen knife clutched in my fist, praying for morning, too wired with fear to even consider sleep. Exhaustion must have finally dragged me under, a shallow, troubled doze, because a distinct thump on the porch jolted me back to consciousness. Heart slamming, I strained to hear more. Silence answered. Forcing leaden limbs to move, I crept to the door, peered through the small pane. Lying starkly on the weathered wood, in the now familiar spot, rested the third note. My hand shook violently as I retrieved it, the paper seeming to vibrate with malevolence. You look tired. That broke something within me. The fragile dam of self-control crumbled. I grabbed my duffel, stuffing belongings in with frantic, clumsy movements. The car keys felt alien in my trembling grasp. Engine roaring to life, tires spitting gravel, I fled down the twisting track, refusing the urge to look back, desperate only for distance. The identity, the motive of my tormentor remains unknown, a chilling enigma. But even now, safe in the city's artificial light, a residual coldness lingers. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, the sensation returns. The prickle of unseen eyes, the feeling of being watched from some unseen vantage point. The deep woods hold no more allure for me. Their silence now speaks only of terror. The antique brass key groaned, teeth biting into the lock with a reluctant, heavy clunk. As Alara eased the cabin door inward, a tremor ran through her, not of cold, but of crossing a threshold far more significant than mere timber and hinges. She wasn't just unlocking a rental. She felt she was unlatching some sealed chamber within herself, unaware she was stepping onto the precipice of a terror that would fray the very fabric of solitude and sanctuary. A month. She'd booked this pocket of wilderness for a month, a desperate flight from the city's cacophony, the relentless grindstone of her career. Seclusion, the advertisement had whispered, tranquility, a communion with the untamed world. No signal, digital or cellular. Just Alara and the breathing woods. Perfection, she'd thought. The cabin breathed a rough-hewn charm. One vast, timbered room beneath a sleeping loft, a kitchenette tucked away like an afterthought, and a stone hearth that commanded the far wall, a silent, waiting sentinel. Pine resin and old smoke hung in the air, a scent so elemental it began to dissolve the knots tightening her shoulders. That first day bled away in the quiet rituals of arrival, stowing provisions, mapping the immediate territory of trees and shadow. Crisp autumn air, fragrant with leaf decay and punctuated by the distant cries of unseen birds, filled her lungs. When twilight painted the woods in bruised purples and deep blues, she coaxed flames to life in the hearth, sinking into the embrace of a worn sofa, a novel open on her lap, a profound sense of ease settling over her like fallen snow. It was in the deep, ink-black heart of the night that the first discordant note sounded. She surfaced from sleep adrift, the fire a collection of pulsing embers casting phantom light. Something had snagged the edge of her consciousness, pulling her from the depths. Lying utterly still, straining against the profound silence, she identified it. Footfalls. Soft, yes, but undeniably present, traversing the cabin's blank floor. Ice bloomed in her veins. She was utterly alone, leagues from any neighbor. No one should be here. She held her breath, a statue carved from fear, listening. The sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. After an eternity measured in heartbeats, logic asserted itself. The groans of old wood, perhaps? A raccoon scrabbling on the roof? City nerves, she chided herself, raw and untuned to the wilderness's nocturnal symphony. Sleep reclaimed her, though its embrace felt shallow, disturbed. Morning arrived, but the disquietude remained, a faint stain on the new day. Moving through the cabin's familiar space, brewing coffee, the ritualistic clatter of breakfast, she felt a persistent sense of displacement. A wooden chair angled differently than she recalled leaving it. The novel, which she distinctly remembered placing on the bedside table, now lay open on the main room's table. Trivialities, easily explained away, yet they accumulated like dust motes in a sunbeam, catching the light, demanding attention. The subsequent days brought more of these subtle disturbances. Returning from a long ramble through the woods, she'd find a window latch undone, a window she meticulously secured each morning. Once, she awoke to find every cupboard door in the kitchenette swung wide, silent, gaping mouths. Each instance met her frantic rationalizations, forgetfulness amplified by isolation, paranoia blooming in the unaccustomed quiet. But the fifth night shattered the fragile dam of reason. She woke with a jolt, that same intrinsic wrongness yanking her awake. As her vision swam into focus through the gloom, she saw it. A form, standing sentinel at the foot of her loft bed, her blood solidified, a silhouette only, stark against the faint ember glow, unmoving, watching. She squeezed her eyes shut, a desperate, silent plea for it to dissolve, to be nothing more than a phantasm of her exhausted mind. When courage finally returned, enough to peel open her eyelids, the space was empty. The remainder of the night was spent entombed beneath blankets, every settling creak of the cabin a fresh assault on her nerves. Dawn brought the overwhelming urge to flee, to pack and abandon this unsettling sanctuary. Yet, the stubborn insistence of logic prevailed, a stress-induced nightmare, vivid and terrifying, but a dream nonetheless. She resolved to stay, though the unease clung to her like damp clothes. Vigilance became her new companion. Locks were checked, rechecked, reinforced. She fashioned crude alarms from empty cans and twine across thresholds. A heavy-duty flashlight became her constant shadow, clutched near her bed, part illumination, part potential bludgeon. For 2 days, an unnatural calm descended. No misplaced objects, no spectral visitors. Alara started to breathe again, tentatively reclaiming the peace she craved, losing herself in the fiery colors of the woods, the hypnotic dance of the hearth fire. She even managed a brittle laugh at her own anxieties. Then came the night that unraveled everything. She awoke not to silence, but to sound, a low, melodic humming drifting up from the main room. Her first thought, a radio inexplicably left on, died instantly. No radio existed here, and even if it did, the airwaves were dead. Clutching the flashlight, its weight a cold comfort, she crept down the loft stairs. The humming ceased, abruptly. In the dim, flickering light cast by the dying fire, she discerned a shape seated in the armchair by the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden silence. Who's there? The question emerged as a ragged croak, barely audible. Slowly, deliberately, the figure rose. Alara raised the flashlight, her knuckles white, ready. But the beam's illumination didn't reveal a stranger. It revealed the impossible, freezing her in a rictus of confusion and pure dread. It was her own face staring back. The same fall of dark hair, the identical contours of her features, even clad in a perfect replica of the pajamas she wore. The doppelganger smiled, a chilling mimicry devoid of warmth. Predation glinted in those unnervingly familiar eyes. "Who are you?" Alara whispered, her voice trembling violently. "What is it you want?" The other Alara tilted its head, the smile fixed, unwavering. When it spoke, the voice was hers, yet threaded with an alien resonance that scraped down her spine. "I'm you," it stated, simple and devastating. "The you that belongs in this place." Alara shook her head, stumbling backward. "No, impossible. You can't be." "I'm me." For every retreating step she took, it advanced one. "I've waited," it continued, the voice soft, insidious. "Waited for you to truly see me. I tried to warn you. This place rejects you. You must leave." Her back met the unyielding cabin wall, trapped. The thing wearing her face stood mere feet away. "Why?" she gasped, playing for time, her mind racing for an escape from this wakened nightmare. "Why must I leave?" The doppelganger's smile stretched, revealing an unsettling sharpness to the teeth. "Because your departure is inevitable. Leave willingly, or be removed." The others learned that. They didn't listen either. "Others?" The word struck her with icy finality. Others before her? Vanished renters swallowed by this place? In that sliver of horrified distraction, it lunged. Instinct took over. She swung the heavy flashlight in a desperate arc. A sickening thud echoed as metal met flesh, or something like it. The creature staggered back, its borrowed features twisting in surprise and sudden fury. Hilara didn't hesitate. She scrambled for the door, her fingers numb and clumsy on the lock. Behind her, the scrape and hurry of its footsteps gaining ground. The lock finally yielded. The door flew open, and she plunged into the biting night air. Blindly, she ran, tearing through the undergrowth, branches lashing her face, unseen roots conspiring to trip her. She could hear the pursuit, a steady, unnervingly rhythmic breathing that never faltered. She ran until her lungs burned like acid and her legs turned to water. When collapse threatened, she threw herself behind the bulk of a fallen log, stifling her ragged gasps against the damp earth. She strained her ears, listening into the sudden, profound silence that had descended upon the woods. Nothing. For hours, she remained huddled, paralyzed by a terror too deep for movement. Only when the first tentative fingers of dawn diluted the blackness did she dare to peer from her refuge. No sign of her pursuer. No sign of anything but trees and gathering light. Slowly, every nerve screaming caution, she picked her way back towards the cabin. In the pale, revealing light of morning, it looked deceptively ordinary, but the illusion was shattered. She couldn't stay. Belongings were hurled into her bag with frantic haste, order, and tidiness, abandoned in the desperate need for escape. As she reached for the door, ready to bolt for the final time, her gaze snagged on something new. A folded piece of paper resting on the small table by the entrance. Trembling fingers unfolded it. The script was chillingly familiar. Her own. Next time, heed the warnings, it read. Not all will be as lenient as I. This place is not for you. Do not return. She dropped the note as if it burned, fleeing to her car, refusing to look back as she tore down the gravel track. The city's familiar embrace of noise and light felt like a sanctuary, though the peace she'd sought was irrevocably poisoned. In the weeks, the months that followed, she wrestled with the memory, trying to cage it within the rational confines of stress, hallucination. But a deeper certainty remained. Something inexplicable, something ancient and terrifying resided in that cabin. She never spoke of it, not the full truth. Who would lend credence to such a tale? The woods remained forbidden territory, remote cabins synonymous with lurking dread. The solitude she once craved now felt thin, permeable, an invitation. Sometimes, late at night, a flicker of movement in a darkened window pane, a fleeting distortion in a mirror catches her eye. For one heart-stopping second, she sees that other face, her face, watching, waiting, and the question echoes, unanswered. Did she truly escape that night? Or did a fragment of her remain, trapped in those silent woods, becoming the next warning whispered on the wind? The tranquility she'd chased had exacted a terrible price, leaving her haunted by the chilling knowledge that the most monstrous reflection might just be one's own. Static crackled from the monitor, a pale ghost image of the pharaonic urn flickering before my eyes. But the artifact itself, that vessel of sun-baked clay and forgotten rites, should have remained utterly, profoundly still. Yet, frame by digital frame, captured by the unblinking security lens, it slid. A tremor ran through me, colder than the midnight drafts whispering through the museum halls, as the impossible registered not just on the screen, but deep within my gut. That minuscule, undeniable shift was the prelude, the discordant first note in a symphony of dread that would unravel the tidy seams of my known world, stitching the dust of millennia into the fabric of the immediate now. 6 months I'd haunted these halls as Silas, the night sentinel, a post perfectly suited to the nocturnal study habits of an aspiring anthropologist. The echoing quiet, the weight of slumbering history. It was usually a sanctuary for poring over texts on kinship patterns and ritualistic burials. Drowsiness, not dread, was the typical adversary, until this particular rotation beneath the indifferent gaze of the moon. The handover at 10 was routine, the clang of the great doors sealing me inside, the familiar click of my boots on polished marble during the initial circuit. Cavernous galleries breathed silence, exhibits slumbering under minimal luminescence, their forms distorted into elongated, skeletal shadows. I'd long acclimated to the sepulchral embrace of the museum after dark, or so I'd convinced myself. Midnight found me stationed before the bank of monitors, the silent narratives of empty corridors spooling across the screens. Then, a flicker in the Egyptian wing feed snagged my attention. Camera 3, perpetually trained on the collection's jewel, a 4,000-year-old libation jar of exquisite provenance. It had jerked, perhaps an inch, maybe less, counterclockwise on its plinth. I blinked, leaned closer, the scent of stale coffee momentarily forgotten. Rewind. Play. The pixels reformed the scene. There, motionless, and there, infinitesimally, yet irrefutably displaced. Aberration, I breathed, the word hollow in the control room's quiet. Logic dictated a technical phantom, a hiccup in the aged digital stream. That urn was solid, ancient weight behind shatterproof vitrine, immovable without considerable noisy effort. A system glitch. It had to be. Yet a compulsion, sharp and insistent, propelled me from my chair. Verification was necessary. The passage towards the Egyptian wing felt different tonight. The very air seemed viscous, thick with an electrical tension that prickled the skin, reminiscent of the charged stillness preceding a violent storm. Reaching the gallery threshold, my gaze swept the familiar layout. All seemed quiescent. The urn rested on its pedestal, bathed in the soft spotlight, its hieroglyphic narratives whispering of dynasties long turned to dust. But, as my steps carried me nearer, a dissonant chord struck within me. It was altered. The meticulously painted eye of Horus, eternally vigilant, customarily faced the gallery's heart. Now its gaze was canted, angled slightly, undeniably, towards the shadowed western wall. My own breath hitched, caught somewhere between disbelief and a primal, rising awareness. I had been so certain. The instant the void registered, the space where the couple at the adjacent table had existed only moments before, I understood the tranquil veneer of this Caribbean voyage was fracturing. This wasn't merely a holiday derailed. It was the prelude to a lethal ballet on the high seas, and I, unwittingly, had been cast as the prey. My name is Julian. I'd bartered weeks of architectural anxieties, the relentless geometry of stress, for the promise of this floating sanctuary. 7 days adrift, the brochure whispered, bathed in sunlight, cradled by turquoise waves, liberated from gravity. What I found instead was a descent into a fear so profound it would etch itself onto my memory like corrosive salt. The initial days unfurled as advertised. Languid hours by the cerulean pool, the clink of ice and twilight cocktails, the staged gaiety of evening reviews. It began subtly on the third night, amidst the cavernous elegance of the main dining salon. While navigating the prime rib and the gentle drone of conversation with the silver-haired pair sharing my table, my attention snagged on them, a younger couple, 2 tables distant. Their discord was a palpable thing, a low thrum beneath the clatter of cutlery. Her gestures were sharp, cutting the air. His eyes darted, scanning the room like a cornered animal. A commonplace spat, I'd thought, maritime ennui perhaps. Finishing my meal, I sought the manufactured thrill of the casino, the evening dissolving into the jangle of slots and the amber glow of brandy. Morning light, sharp and unforgiving, revealed the anomaly at breakfast. Their table stood vacant, chairs tucked with unnerving precision, as if awaiting occupants who would never arrive, or perhaps never had. My gaze swept the bustling room. Had they merely relocated? No sign. "Excuse me," I ventured, flagging down our steward, a man whose smile seemed professionally laminated. "That couple, seated there last night, have you seen them?" His brow furrowed with practiced bewilderment. "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but that particular table remained unoccupied yesterday evening. It awaits assignment." An icy tendril snaked around my vertebrae. I knew what I had witnessed. The strained whispers, the coiled tension. It wasn't imagination. The ship suddenly felt vast and labyrinthine. Throughout the day, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface, I scanned faces, decks, lounges. They were gone. A vessel this size, a self-contained world, surely couldn't simply swallow people whole, could it? That evening, nursing a drink at the Meridian Bar, fragments of conversation drifted, catching like burrs. "Did you hear?" a woman murmured, her voice tight with morbid fascination. "Another pair vanished. That makes 3 couples now." My head jerked up, perhaps too sharply. "Forgive me," I interjected, the words slightly breathless. "Did you say missing?" The women exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly guarded. "Oh, it's likely nothing," the first offered, a dismissive wave of her hand failing to conceal the tremor. "Rumors spread like wildfire on these cruises, you understand." But their eyes held a flicker of genuine fear. This wasn't shipboard gossip. It was a contagion of dread. The remainder of the night became a furtive quest for whispers, piecing together fragmented narratives. In the span of 48 hours, 3 couples had seemingly dematerialized. No record of disembarkation, cabins discovered pristine, yet abandoned, beds smooth, belongings left as if their owners might return at any moment. Staff deflected inquiries with polished evasiveness. An attempt to engage a uniformed security officer met a curt recitation about passenger confidentiality, a verbal dead end. Sleep became an impossibility that night. My thoughts raced, colliding, seeking patterns in the impossible. Driven by unease, I found myself pacing the upper decks in the pre-dawn chill, the vast, indifferent ocean breathing coolly against my skin. And then I saw him, a lone figure near the stern railing, grappling with a cumbersome weight, a heavy canvas sack, its silhouette disturbingly human. I recoiled behind the solid curve of a lifeboat, my pulse hammering against my ribs. With a grunt of exertion, the figure heaved the bundle upwards and outwards. A muted splash broke the water's dark skin far below. He scanned the empty deck, a furtive, sweeping glance, before melting back into the ship's shadowed recesses. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, the emergency number for ship security swimming before my eyes. But as my thumb hovered over the screen, a hand clamped hard across my mouth, stifling my breath. I truly wouldn't advise that. A low voice resonated directly behind my ear. Simultaneously, the unmistakable, cold pressure of a blade pressed against the small of my back. Propelled by the unseen threat, I was marched silently back towards my cabin. Once the door clicked shut behind us, he spun me around. The uniform was immaculate, crisp white, bearing the insignia of a ship's officer. His face, under the cabin lights, was unnervingly composed. "You observed something outside your purview," he stated, his tone level, almost conversational, "which presents us with a complication." Who are you?" The question emerged ragged, barely audible. "Those couples, what did you do?" A smile touched his lips but failed to ignite his eyes. "Consider me part of the vessel's sanitation crew, let's say, removing certain contaminants. We strive to maintain an unblemished cruise experience naturally." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. This man, sworn in passenger safety, was the architect of these disappearances. The motive remained terrifyingly opaque. "You're deranged," I whispered, instinctively retreating until my back met the cool paneling of the wall. "You can't just erase people. Someone will find out." He chuckled, a dry, unsettling sound that scraped against the silence. People vanish constantly. The sea is adept at keeping secrets. Unfortunate accidents, you see. Tragic, but the itineraries remain unchanged, the buffets replenished. A chilling certainty settled over me. This was not his first voyage into darkness. How many souls had met their end over these railings? And now, he continued, the knife tracing idle patterns in the air. The question is what to do about you. Panic surged, demanding action. Survival instinct screamed. My eyes darted, searching for any object, any leverage. Just then, the ship's horn erupted. A deep, resonant blast signaling proximity to land or perhaps just protocol startling us both. In that fractional pause, that momentary breach in his focus, I lunged. The heavy bedside lamp became an extension of my desperation. I swung it, connecting with his temple with a dull, wet thud. He crumpled without a sound, the knife skittering across the carpet. I didn't check his pulse. I fled. Bursting from the cabin, I pounded down the corridor, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of my frantic footsteps. towards the main atrium, towards authority, towards help. Yet, even as I ran, a horrifying understanding dawned. Who was safe? If one officer was complicit, how many others shared the secret? Was the entire crew a closed circle, guarding a monstrous truth? I reached the purser's desk, chest heaving, words tumbling out. "Help me, please! There's a killer! He's on the crew! People are disappearing!" The woman behind the polished counter regarded me with carefully modulated concern. "Sir, please try to calm yourself. What seems to be the trouble?" I tried to articulate the nightmare. The arguing couple, the empty table, the rumors, the officer, the body, the knife. But the narrative unraveled, sounding frantic, unhinged even to my own ears. Her expression shifted subtly from concern to professional pity. "Sir, perhaps you should accompany me," she suggested, her voice gentle but firm. The implicit destination, the ship's infirmary. "We have medical staff available." "No, you don't get it." My voice rose, attracting curious stares from passing passengers. "He's still out there. We're all in danger." A firm hand settled on my shoulder. I spun, fists half raised, confronting the imposing figure of the ship's captain, his face a mask of command. "Is there an issue here, mister?" My explanation died unspoken. Standing just behind the captain, a stark white bandage adorning his temple, his eyes burning with cold fury, was the officer from my cabin. In that instant, the trap snapped shut. My isolation was absolute. My word against theirs, their uniforms, their authority, their meticulously constructed reality. There was only one escape route left. I shoved past the captain, ignoring his indignant shout, and sprinted, not toward safety within the ship, but away from it. Feet pounded behind me as I burst onto the exposed deck, the night wind a physical blow. The railing gleamed under the deck lights mere feet away. The dark, churning water beckoned below. It wasn't a choice. It was the only option left that was mine to make. I vaulted over. The impact with the frigid ocean stole my breath. Surfacing, choking on salt water, I watched the constellation of the ship's lights recede, a glittering, malevolent island shrinking against the black immensity. Survival was uncertain. The cold, the currents, the sheer emptiness, yet infinitely preferable to remaining aboard that vessel of curated horrors. Floating adrift, suspended between rescue and oblivion, I couldn't shake the question. How many other liners plied these same waters, their festive decks masking subterranean depths of depravity? How many other smiling predators mingled with the unsuspecting, selecting their next victims between the shuffleboard court and the midnight buffet? A fishing trawler eventually plucked me from the indifferent sea, but my fractured story met only skepticism, then outright disbelief. The cruise corporation issued strenuous denials, portraying me as a disturbed individual succumbing to a mental health crisis. But the truth remains branded onto my consciousness. Now, years later, the glossy advertisements for ocean voyages trigger not wanderlust, but a visceral shudder, because I learned firsthand that the greatest perils aren't always the tempestuous waves or distant shores. Sometimes the monster is beside you, immaculate in his uniform, offering a reassuring smile while waiting for the opportune moment. So, should you ever contemplate entrusting your life to the whims of the sea aboard such a vessel, remember my passage. Ask yourself if you are truly prepared to be isolated miles from land, with no guarantee of sanctuary, no certainty of whom to trust. Once that gangway retracts, you are utterly reliant on the humanity, or the terrifying lack thereof, sailing alongside you. The first time Elias watched his digital ghost glide through unfamiliar city arteries while he himself remained inert on his sofa, a breath of laughter escaped him. A mere technological hiccup, surely. But the phantom journeys persisted, acquiring a disquieting frequency, their mapped itineraries rendered with an unnerving fidelity that hinted at something far more intricate, perhaps insidious, taking root in the ether. It began on an unremarkable Sunday afternoon, the kind steeped in quietude. Elias was adrift in the flickering narrative of some streaming series, a human island on his living room couch, decidedly stationary. His phone, resting on the low table before him, pulsed intermittently with the mundane traffic of notifications. Amidst a particularly taut scene, its screen flared with unusual insistence. Curiosity piqued, he retrieved it, discovering a cascade of alerts from his navigation app, an application dormant for days. Unlocking the device revealed a live map charting his supposed progress. According to this glowing chart, he was currently navigating a street whose name evoked nothing, traversing a district rarely troubled by his presence. A chuckle, thin and uncertain, surfaced. A glitch, a phantom signal. He force-quit the application, meticulously disabled location services, and submerged himself back into the fictional world on screen. Yet an unsettling resonance lingered, a discordant note in the quiet afternoon. Days later, the anomaly resurfaced. Elias was immersed in the focused quiet of his workplace, wrestling with project schematics when his phone vibrated against the desk. Another summons from the navigation app. This time, the map depicted him tracing the coastline 100 miles distant from his actual coordinates. The display rendered his spectral path in real time, complete with fluctuating arrival estimates and live traffic advisories. A cold current traced his spine. This was no simple malfunction. He watched, mesmerized as the cerulean dot, his digital proxy, snaked through unknown thoroughfares, observing phantom stoplights, its velocity adjusting as if genuinely contending with unseen vehicles. Weeks unfurled, and these incorporeal excursions became a fixture. Sometimes they were brief urban jaunts, other times ambitious day-long expeditions to destinations utterly alien to him. Each instance documented with meticulous detail, pauses at intersections, calculated detours around non-existent construction, even brief halts suggestive of refueling or coffee breaks. Elias found himself consumed, charting these ghost voyages in a dedicated journal, meticulously logging times, durations, destinations. He plunged into research, scouring online maps and forums for any thread connecting these locales to his own existence, seeking a pattern, a rationale behind his digital doppelganger's wanderlust. None emerged. The routes remained stubbornly random, illogical. Sleep became elusive. He'd find himself awake in the spectral hours past midnight, transfixed by the phone's glow as his avatar traversed distant landscapes. Daylight hours were fractured, his concentration shattered by the constant, compulsive need to check the screen, half anticipating another spontaneous virtual departure. He waged a campaign against the phenomenon, deleting and reinstalling the application, performing factory resets, even acquiring entirely new hardware. Futile gestures. The phantom trips endured, growing only more elaborate, more profoundly unsettling. One particularly grim evening, he observed his digital self navigating towards a remote mountain enclave. The blue marker crawled to the very precipice of what the map delineated as a sheer cliff face. There, it halted. For hours, it remained static, poised on the brink. Terror coiled in Elias's gut as he conjured scenarios dark and final. When, at long last, the dot stirred, retracing its path toward civilization, tears of sheer, unadulterated relief streamed down his face. He knew assistance was imperative. He confided in friends, but their responses were laced with skepticism. Suggestions of elaborate pranks, diagnoses of technophobia, gentle dismissals of an overactive imagination grappling with a simple software bug. Yet Elias knew, with visceral certainty, this transcended mere glitch. The intricate detail, the unwavering consistency, it bespoke something deliberate, something orchestrated. In desperation, he contacted the application's developers. Their initial replies were boilerplate, dismissive, but as he furnished them with annotated screenshots with the meticulous logs from his journal, their tone shifted, acquiring a veneer of professional concern. His case was escalated to their security division. Promises of investigation offered. Weeks bled into one another, devoid of updates. The ghost journeys continued, their tempo increasing. Elias felt bifurcated, inhabiting two distinct realities: his tangible, largely sedentary existence and the unpredictable, adventurous life playing out on his phone screen. A peculiar affinity began to bloom for this other self, this digital wanderer. He found himself wondering about its experiences, the unseen textures of its far-flung explorations. Then, on a rain-lashed Tuesday evening, the paradigm shifted. Huddled on his couch, Elias tracked his avatar's progress through a tempestuous night on a serpentine mountain road. Abruptly, a new notification materialized, a text message from an unrecognized number. Enjoying the ride? It read. His blood turned to ice water. With fingers that trembled betrayingly, he composed a reply. Who are you? What is happening? The response was almost instantaneous. Don't you recognize yourself? A torrent of questions erupted from him. Who was orchestrating this? Why him? What conceivable purpose did it serve? But each increasingly frantic query elicited the same cryptic refrain. Don't you recognize yourself? Staring at those words illuminated on the screen, a horrifying possibility began to coalesce in the shadowed corners of his mind. What if these weren't phantom trips? What if, through some inexplicable mechanism, these journeys possessed a terrifying reality? The notion was preposterous, defied all logic, and yet, reviewing his journal entries, fragmented memories surfaced like flotsam. Those mornings, waking groggy and disoriented on the couch after nodding off. the inexplicable traces of mud clinging to his car's tires, unfamiliar receipts discovered crumpled in jacket pockets. Had he been living a clandestine second life, utterly oblivious? Was he somehow physically undertaking these voyages, the memory wiped clean upon his return? Rationality recoiled, but a deeper, primal instinct whispered that the impossible might hold truth. Hands shaken, he navigated to his phone's photo gallery, scrolling back through the preceding weeks. There, interspersed with the mundane chronology of his ordinary life, were images utterly alien to his memory. Sunsets bleeding over unfamiliar horizons, selfies taken in locations he'd never consciously visited, photographs of meals he couldn't recall consuming. His mind reeled, grappling with the implications. Was he experiencing fugue states, sleepwalking on a continental scale? Or was the phenomenon something stranger still, defying known categories? He needed irrefutable proof. The next time the navigation app signaled the commencement of a journey, he would be ready. He positioned a camera in his living room, aimed squarely at the couch, its small red light confirming it was recording. His opportunity arrived 2 nights later. As his digital counterpart embarked on another expedition, Elias ensured the camera was active and settled onto the couch, preparing for a long vigil. Hours crawled by. On the phone screen, he traversed hundreds of miles. In the tangible world, he remained perfectly still, eyes locked on the glowing display, a prisoner observing his own spectral freedom. When the trip concluded on the map, he hesitated, a profound reluctance warring with the desperate need for certainty. Steeling himself, he accessed the camera footage. Playback commenced. There he was, an effigy on the couch, gaze fixed on his phone, hour after identical hour. The recording offered only the mundane truth. Elias, unmoving, gradually succumbing to fatigue, his posture slumping, hair becoming disheveled as the night deepened. No mysterious vanishings, no inexplicable departures. Just him. A confusing admixture of relief and disappointment washed over him. Proof, yes, that he wasn't physically disappearing, but it cast him no closer to understanding the fundamental nature of the enigma. The following day, another message arrived from the unknown sender. Now you see. But do you understand? Elias offered no reply. Words felt inadequate, clumsy tools against the immensity of the questions churning within him. If he wasn't the traveler, who or what was? And for what purpose was he granted this disturbing spectatorship? As days bled into weeks, a subtle transformation occurred in his perception. Fear began to recede, replaced by a strange, almost illicit flicker of anticipation. Where next? What unforeseen vistas would unfold on the small screen? He started to engage with the journeys vicariously, actively imagining the sensory tapestry of these places he'd never tread. The scent of salt spray on a distant coast, the murmur of an unknown city, the texture of mountain air. Paradoxically, these ghost trips evolved into a form of liberation. His corporeal life might be circumscribed by routine, by the pressures of work and the mundane, but his digital echo was an explorer, an adventurer unbound. Through the portal of his phone, he was accessing a life imbued with mystery and perpetual motion. The riddle of the phantom GPS excursions remained unsolved. The developers eventually closed his ticket, citing an inability to replicate or explain the phenomenon. The cryptic texter fell silent, leaving only the echo of that unsettling question. But Elias, over time, made a conscious choice. He ceased his fearful obsession, his frantic quest for answers. Instead, he chose to embrace the anomaly. These digital journeys had woven themselves into the fabric of his being, a strange electronic resonance expanding the horizons of his contained world. Now, when the familiar notification chimes, a faint smile touches Elias's lips. Where today? What new adventure awaits his spectral self? And always humming beneath the surface of his thoughts, that persistent, resonant question, don't I recognize myself? In this era, woven from signals and screens, perhaps we all possess digital counterparts, living out lives parallel to our own, lives we can only glimpse or imagine. His, it seemed, had simply extended an invitation to ride along. Consciousness returned not gently, but with a leaden weight settling upon my sternum. A film of perspiration clung to my forehead, peculiar in the room's temperate air. An indefinable wrongness permeated the quiet apartment. Navigating the small space, my foot nudged a forgotten cluster of paintbrushes, their bristles stiff on the floorboards. The corridor stretching towards my studio lay steeped in shadow. My hand, betraying a tremor, found the light switch. As the studio door swung inward, the caustic perfume of fresh paint assaulted my senses, far more potent than any lingering solvent fumes. My gaze snagged, then fixed upon the easel. The painting wasn't mine anymore. I stared, my eyelids gritty, blinking furiously against the visual dissonance. Useless. The composition shimmering on the canvas bore only a mocking resemblance to the piece I'd left drying before sleep claimed me. A cold knot tightened low in my gut, my throat constricted, a dry vice. Landscapes are my refuge, my decade-long obsession. Serene coastlines, hushed woodlands. Last night's work depicted a meadow bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon, the grass a vibrant emerald sheet. I'd been finessing the clouds, chasing that perfect luminescence before setting down my palette near midnight. Peace had emanated from it then. This morning, however, it radiated only bleakness. The grass, stripped of its welcoming hue, had decayed into a sullen, mud-slicked brown. A bruised, heavy gray smothered the sky, leaking streaks of near black that bled down towards the distant tree line. Disorienting enough, that transformation alone. But something else held my eye captive. A shape coalesced in the background. Near a knot of skeletal trees at the meadow's edge, a figure stood. Indistinct, faceless, yet its posture conveyed a stooped intensity, a forward lean pregnant with suggestion. The pigment there looked unnervingly new, glistening wetly, applied mere hours ago. No memory surfaced of painting such a thing. No recollection of mixing those somber, earthbound shades. I drew closer, craning my neck to scrutinize the brushwork. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Sweat prickled anew on my brow. Hesitantly, a fingertip grazed the surface. Tacky, not yet cured. I stood frozen for a long beat, wrestling with the encroaching suspicion of my own sanity. Could I have done this, adrift in some nocturnal fugue state? The notion felt alien, unsupported by any precedent. A tremor began in my legs, forcing me to step back. Calm down, I commanded myself. Exhaustion plays tricks, perhaps an experimental urge forgotten in the haze of late-night work. Water, a clear head. That was the prescription. I propelled myself towards the kitchen on unsteady legs, the simple act of pouring water into a glass a monumental effort against the trembling in my hands. The refrigerator hummed its mundane tune. I tried anchoring myself to the physical world. The cool kiss of the glass, the slow swallow, the deliberate effort to regulate my ragged breath. My thoughts pinwheeled frantically. Intruder? Sleep painting? Yet the windows remained secured, the door bolted from within. No trace of forced entry, nothing disturbed but the canvas. Setting the glass down with a click, I took one last, sweeping glance around the familiar, suddenly alien space, then retraced my steps to the studio. It was still there, the figure, the grim, cold meadow. A wave of primal fear washed over me, but I fought it back, clinging to rationality. Repaint it, erase the aberration, move on. I selected a clean brush, squeezed a hopeful dollop of iridium onto the palette. But as I attempted to overlay the sullied grass, the fresh pigment seemed to recoil, refusing purchase, mingling into a sickly, indeterminate sludge with the still damp darkness beneath. Several frustrating attempts yielded only murk. Defeated, I stared at the distant shape, a profound unease settling deep in my bones. I abandoned the painting for the day, retreating to a corner to lose myself in minor sketches, watercolors, anything to soothe the fraying edges of my nerves. That evening, rituals of security felt newly vital. Window latches double-checked, the deadbolt thrown with decisive force. Inside the studio, I positioned a small, battery-operated motion sensor light, its beam aimed squarely at the easel. A precaution, I told myself, perhaps to catch my own somnambulistic artistry. Dinner was a tasteless affair, my gaze studiously averted from the corrupted landscape. Tension coiled in my shoulders, my spine aching from a day spent hunched and wary. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, troubled sea. I surfaced several times, heart pounding, scanning the oppressive dark. The motion sensor remained stubbornly unlit. Morning arrived heavy with foreboding. I approached the studio, pulse already galloping. The door opened onto the scent of fresh paint, stronger now, almost cloying. My eyes locked onto the canvas. The sky had darkened further, pregnant with an impending storm, and the figure, it had advanced. No longer hugging the tree line, it stood several paces closer to the foreground, its presence more defined, more demanding. Faintly behind it, another shape began to emerge from the gloom, too indistinct to decipher. A cold prickle traced my spine. Goose flesh bloomed on my arms. I glanced at the motion sensor. Still in place, its green battery light glowing steadily. No indication of movement had triggered it. Again, the tentative touch, damp, sticky. I rubbed my thumb and forefinger together, the familiar texture confirming the impossible. Panic surged. I conducted a frantic, fruitless search of the apartment. Locks secure, floors unmarked. No sign, not the faintest whisper of another presence. Pulling out my phone, I snapped several pictures of the painting, then recorded a shaky video, narrating the events, a desperate attempt to anchor my experience in objective reality. The nightmare rhythm established itself over the ensuing days. Each dawn revealed fresh violations on canvas. One night, it spread to a nascent piece, a mountain range sketched beneath a hopeful sunrise, barely begun, just outlines and a pale wash. The following morning, oppressive shadows clawed at the peaks, and perched on a precipice, surveying the valley below, was another shape. That same hunched posture, that same disquieting stillness. My throat tightened with each discovery. These weren't random marks. They possessed detail, depth, and unsettling intentionality. The skill was undeniable, yet the studio remained my solitary confinement. Driven by desperation, I began sleeping in the studio itself, curled on a small divan pushed against the far wall. My phone, mounted on a tripod, became my nocturnal vigil, recording continuously. The first night yielded nothing on playback. I saw myself stir, rise, peer at the canvas in the gloom, then succumb again to exhausted sleep. But morning light revealed the lie. The painting had changed. The figure had moved again, and the second shape had resolved beside it. Two figures now, both oriented towards the viewer. The recording showed nothing. No spectral artists, no brushes dancing on air. Only me, sleeping fitfully while the impossible unfolded beyond the camera's unblinking gaze. After the fourth or fifth night of this futile surveillance, I surrendered. Exhaustion carved dark hollows beneath my eyes. A perpetual nausea churned in my stomach whenever I crossed the studio threshold. My own art felt tainted, my confidence eroded by the inexplicable. I tried explaining it to my friend, Leo, but without him witnessing the overnight transformation, my words sounded like delusion. Stress, he suggested gently, a dissociative state, plausible theories devoid of proof that felt fundamentally wrong in my gut. One evening, resolve hardened within me. I would reclaim my canvas. Setting up a bright lamp, I sat before the easel, brush gripped tightly, determined to obliterate the intruders from the meadow. Thick strokes of umber and ochre, strokes meant to mimic the original trees, began to smother the alien shapes. My chest felt constricted. The heavy odor of oil paint filled the small space. An hour passed in focused, almost violent effort. Slowly, the silhouettes vanished beneath layers of deliberate pigment. Wiping sweat from my brow, I stepped back. Messy, yes, but blessedly empty of those disturbing presences. A fragile tendril of relief unfurled within me. I dragged a folding chair into the studio, positioning it to face the easel. Tonight, I would not sleep. An energy drink hissed open, its chemical sweetness sharp on my tongue. My back protested against the unyielding chair, but I ignored the discomfort. As midnight bled into the early hours, the apartment settled into profound silence. No distant sirens, no neighborly murmurs, just the oppressive quiet, amplify my own strained awareness. My eyelids grew heavy. I stretched, tapped my foot, blinked hard against the encroaching fog. Around 2:01 a.m., resistance crumbled. I drifted. A violent jerk snapped me awake. 3:17 a.m. The phone's screen glowed accusingly. My neck screamed from the awkward angle. I looked at the painting. The air rushed from my lungs. The figures were back. The layers of paint I'd so painstakingly applied were gone, vanished as if they'd never existed. And the figures themselves, they were clearer, sharper. They had faces now. Featureless expanses, yet undeniably faces, their blank eyes fixed forward with unnerving intensity. A glacial cold swept through me. My arms trembled uncontrollably. The energy drink can slip from my grasp, clattering across the floorboards. Scrambling to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs, I fumbled with the lamp switch, though the overhead light already bathed the room in stark illumination. Nothing made sense. Bile rose in my throat. I forced myself to meet their gaze. Those painted eyes, devoid of expression yet radiating a chilling focus. Subtle lines etched around them, the paint layered with a skill that gave them a terrible, stark dimensionality. I reached out, my hand shaking. The surface was dry, utterly dry as if completed hours ago. I staggered back, tripping over the chair, catching myself with a choked curse. My breath came in ragged gasps. The remainder of the night dissolved into a haze of frantic pacing. Bedroom, closet, grabbing a blanket, throwing it over the easel, a futile gesture against the unseen. I couldn't bear to look. How? The question hammered relentlessly against my skull, finding no purchase, no answer. Exhaustion warred with terror. Sleep was impossible. Closing my eyes only conjured those faces burning behind my lids, watching me even through the fabric shroud. Dawn filtered gray through the windows, finding my eyes raw, burning. In the kitchen, the simple act of filling a glass with water felt like navigating a minefield. My hands shaking so badly the stream splashed against the sink's metal basin. "Leave," a voice screamed inside. "Go to Leo's. Flee. But abandon my work, my sanctuary, now defiled? And what if the affliction wasn't tied to the apartment, but to me? Would the canvases continue their monstrous evolution elsewhere? Returning to the studio felt like approaching an executioner. I ripped the blanket away. The faces stared back, harsher, more defined in the morning light. Phone out. Pictures snapped. A hurried, frantic message tapped out to Leo, attaching the images as desperate proof. Silence answered. Too early, perhaps. I tried busying myself, cleaning brushes, the familiar ritual, the sharp scent of solvent a temporary, inadequate anchor. Yesterday's failed attempt to paint over them mocked me. No reason to believe another try would succeed, yet a surge of defiant anger propelled me forward. I would not surrender to this violation. A fresh tube of pale gray paint cracked open. Again, the thick strokes, the determined obliteration of those faces, coating the canvas until nothing showed through. Breathing hard, shirt clinging damply to my skin, fingers aching from the death grip on the brush, I leaned the painting against the wall, facing inwards. Tonight it would not watch me. Tonight it would be denied its audience. That evening, I placed the canvas face down on the protective plastic sheeting beneath the easel. A ridiculous precaution, perhaps, but I was beyond rational measures. I locked the studio door from the inside, exiting through the secondary door into the hallway, sealing it behind me. Would denying its sight, restricting its position, halt the metamorphosis? Camping on the living room couch, I filled the silence with music, scrolled numbly through videos, forcing wakefulness until exhaustion finally dragged me under around 2. My stomach remained a tight knot of dread. My limbs felt weighted with fatigue. Morning. The walk to the studio door was a journey through molasses. Key in the lock, a deep breath, push. The first sight froze the blood in my veins. It stood defiant on the easel, resurrected, upright. I knew. I had left it face down. A wave of vertigo threatened to pull me under. Slow steps forward, each one an agony of anticipation. The painting, transformed utterly. The sky, an abyss of near black. The meadow, a writhing distortion of tormented trees. And the figures, twin abominations now, commanded the composition's corrupted heart. Side by side, staring directly out, their faces rendered with a crude yet terrifying power. Eyes vast and dark, swallowing the light. My mouth was dust. Sound refused to form. The potent scent of fresh paint, thick and immediate. Then, a soft plink. A single, viscous drop of black paint detached itself from the canvas, sliding down the surface to splatter onto the plastic sheet below. I stand here now, heart a frantic drum against my ribs, breath shallow and fast. A tremor lives in my legs, threatening to buckle them. What next? Touch it again? Flee? Destroy the canvas? The questions circle uselessly. I am trapped in this horrifying feedback loop. The faces seared onto my mind's eye even when I blink. They refuse to fade. My own space, my sanctuary, feels irrevocably contaminated. I have no strategy left, no defense against this creeping artistic possession. All I possess is the chilling certainty that my paintings are no longer my own, and each act of resistance only births darker, stranger horrors. This is where I am. My hands shake as I recount this, adrift, waiting, watching for what the next dawn will bring to the canvas and to me.